Sikha we will be learning will be in Parshas Baaloshcho, Sikha Aleph of Lekutei Sichos Chelik Chav Gimel. So Rebbe starts like this: "From Posei Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe b'Midbar Sinai v'Hashana Hashenis l'Tzeisa Meretz Mitzrayim v'Chedesh Rishon Leimer." And the Posei where it says Hashem spoke to Moshe in the Midbar Sinai, the second year when they went out of Mitzrayim, the first month saying, which means this is Hashem speaking to Moshe in the Midbar, the second year, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first month. For the Rabbi hat angesagt auf Asiyas Pesach. There the Rabbi told him about the Korban Pesach. The Pasha from Pesach Sheni. First he told them that they should bring the Korban Pesach, and then the Hemshech to that, it says that there were people who could not bring the Korban Pesach because they were Tomei. So they asked if they could bring, what could they do? And the Eibishter, the Hemshech to this, said, I give them a chance the second month, they could bring the Korban Pesach in Pesach Sheni. So on this posik, stellt sich Rashi of the Werte b'Chedesh Rishon is mefarish. On this posik, Rashi quotes the words from the posik b'Chedesh Rishon, the first month, which means Nisan, when he's mefarish and explains it like this: Parsha shebereif reisha sefer linamra ad ir. The parsha in the beginning of the sefer, which is the beginning of Parshas Bamidbar, that was said Rosh Chodesh Iyar. In the beginning of Chumash Bamidbar, beginning of Parshas Bamidbar, it talks about the Eibush speaking to Moshe, and this was Rosh Chodesh Iyar, to tell him to count the Yidden. So this parsha that's talking in this week's parsha in Baaloshcho, which was said on Rosh Chodesh Nisan that same year, really happened before what it says earlier in Parshas Bamidbar. Here it's talking about Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and the beginning of Parshas Bamidbar, when it talks about counting the Yidden, it was Rosh Chodesh Iyar. So this happened before. Nevertheless, the Torah, the order of the Torah is the opposite. First, it mentions that we learned that parsha, which is Parshas Bamidbar, which talks about Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and then afterwards we learn on what happened Rosh Chodesh Nisan. The Mother Torah that teaches you she'ein seder mukdim u'mucher b'Torah. There is no order of what is first and what is later in the Torah. And then there's more to the Rashi. The Rebbe will explain that because Lakam Siv Gimel, later in Siv Gimel, we talk about the second half of the Rashi. So Rashi seems to be saying here that the reason why the order first was written in Chumash about Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and then about Rosh Chodesh Nisan, because there is no order, there's no chronological order in the Torah. In other words, the Torah was not written in a way that it has to follow the chronological order of the way things happen. And sometimes the Torah writes something that happened later, writes it earlier. This is the simple way we learn of Pshat Rashi. We'll see later, the Rebbe will explain the words exactly, but this is the Teichen Kloli, the general idea. Davram Hashem, so we have to understand. This idea that in the Torah it doesn't follow the chronological order, and we can't, there's no first and last. In other words, it doesn't go according to the order, the way the things happened in time. That idea we know from before. But Yeshen from Kama Psukim Shalifne is from many Psukim before this Parsha, we learned already this thing. The Rashi already brings it before in this Pirush. Gleich in der erste Seder, Breishis B'Sefer, the end of Parshas Breishis. Rashi over there, it's the first Seder, the first Parsha in the Torah. From Posik Liyodon Ruchi Ba'odam, the gamer. Hoyayom of Mei V'Esem Shono, and the Posik where it speaks about it, that Shem said they'll be waiting for 120 years, etc. Anyway, on that Posik, the Rashi says that happened later than things that says later in the Chumash. Rashi says because they muk the mucha b'Torah, because the Torah is not written in the chronological order. And the same thing many other places. So we already know from before this rule that ein muk the mucha b'Torah. Nochmer, we go further. Der prat gufe, the Shinei HaSeder from the Pasha Shabbat Sefer. Actually, even concerning our Inyan, which is the Parsha in the beginning of the Chumash Bamidbar versus this Parsha Baaloshcho, even concerning this specifically, based on Shem for free, we know that from before. And in the Seder was Matesh gelernt, in the Seder that we just learned, we just came from Parshas Nosei. So in that Seder, right away already we know this idea. Not only we know B'chlal B'Meila itself understood here too. Even concerning this, we know it already. What did we learn in the Parsha before? By the Karbonos HaNesiim. Nesiim brought the Karbonos. What says is Mefurish in Posik Zmanom. In Posik it says, when did the Nesiim bring the Karbonos? Pasuk says the time was the day that Moshe finished putting up the Mishkan was Chodesh Nisan. Rasha says this happened to Chodesh Nisan. And then the Torah says they should bring the Karbanis, so the Karbanis were brought from Chodesh Nisan on. And that's written in Parshas Nosei. He's lamadita. From that we could or else have learned their fun. So Rasha says from our Parsha here, we learn that but we know it in this Inyan Gufa from before, because we already learned about what happened for Chodesh Nisan in Parshas Nosei. So already Lamadata, we learned their fun from that as that even in this detail, there's no order in the Torah, the order of time. Or in Parsha Shebereisha Sefer L'Nemlad Ir. Rasha says, we know that the Parsha in the beginning of Bamidbar was said Ir. In Parshas Nosei, which comes after, it speaks about what happened to Chodesh Nisan. So we already know concerning these dates that the Torah doesn't go in the order of time. So why does Rasha say we first know it from here? From Rasha comes out that now that we learned this Parsha here in Baaloshcho, which talks about the Chodesh Nisan, and Bamidbar spoke about the Chodesh here, so we see from here we learn that there's no Seder in time. Concerning these dates, Gufa, we know from before. In the beginning of Bamidbar talks about the Chodesh Nisan, Chodesh year. In Nosei already it talks about the Chodesh Nisan. So already from there we see that it's not in the order. So what does Rasha mean that we learn it from here? Unochmer in them. Dort is Rasha going to Mefarish. It's even more, not only we know it. Rasha doesn't even explain that, because the same question we have here, we have over there. Same question Rasha has here. But we're talking here about the Chodesh Nisan. And when Bamidbar, which is earlier, talks about the Chodesh year, the same kasha we have in the Parsha before, that in Parshas Nosei it talks about the Chodesh Nisan, and earlier than that, in Parsha Bamidbar, it talks about the Chodesh year. And Rasha didn't even say it, because obviously Rasha didn't have to say it. We take it for granted. We know already from before that there's no Seder of time in the Chumash. So Rasha didn't even have to say it. So the question will be, so why does Rasha say it here? Noch früher in demselben Sedre, we even find the same thing in the same Sedre, we find another thing which shows the same idea, which is Vayishalchem in Amach. And it says that we should send away, Eibusha said to Moshe to tell the Yidden to send away from the camps the Tomei, the people who are Tomei. Is Rasha Mefare. Rasha says the Parsha Zu Nemre B'Yem Shukan HaMishkan. That Parsha was said in the day the Mishkan was put up. But also given by the Chodesh Nisan genau, which is the Chodesh Nisan. So there's another inyan in the Parshas Nosei, which talks about the Chodesh Nisan, and Parsha Bamidbar talks about the Chodesh year. So even from that we see that the order of Zman, of time, doesn't apply. So the question is Vizok Rasha Lamadeto Do. How does Rasha say here? If we look back at the Lashon of Rasha, he says that the Parsha in the beginning was till Ir. Lamadeto, that teaches you that there is no Seder of time. That teaches you as if we didn't know it before. That they say that there is no earlier or later, which means no Seder of time. In Torah, we learn out from here when we know it already from before. The answer is like this. The Chidush do is a Seder Mugdam Muchar B'Torah. The Chidush here, what Rasha is saying here, something that we learned from here and we didn't know it before, is where the Rasha says, Ein Seder Mugdam Muchar B'Torah. But them Loshen not Rasha gesagt in the Friedrich in the earlier places, Rasha didn't say Ein Seder Mugdam Muchar B'Torah. Rasha said Ein Mugdam Muchar B'Torah, which means Torah does not go in a chronological order. Here Rasha says something new that we learned after from here. There is no Seder in Mugdam Muchar B'Torah. There's no order in the Seder of time. What does it mean there's no order? So the Rebbe explains what that means. The Erter Friya, where Rasha sagt, Mugdam Muchar B'Torah, the earlier places where Rasha says that Ein Mugdam Muchar B'Torah, without the word Seder, he just says there's no earlier and later, which means there's no chronological order in the Torah. He says, it's talking about a parsha, something that happened, or something Hashem said, which is not in the proper place, seemingly. It's not in the proper order of the way it happened in the time. In die Form is nicht as Akasha the Shimei Aseder. Here, it's not such a big question why the order is not according to the timeline. Why? Weil Teire ist nicht a Sefer Divrei Yomim, was erzählt Seder Amiroes. Und dem Zman, wie jeder Zivil ist gesagt geworden. The Teire is not a history book to tell us the times of when Hashem said this and when certain things happened. It doesn't go. That's not the purpose of the Chumash. Maybe it's not such a big kasha. Why it doesn't go according to the order of time? Because it's not a history book to tell you the time. And nevertheless, Rashi says that the reason why it could be written that way because there's no chronological order in Torah. Rashi says it just kumt b'leis b'avoda numbers only Tom can toys is mana me'era or then is mana tzivui. Rashi just tells us that you shouldn't make a mistake and not know the proper time when this happened or when Hashem said this. Sometimes you can make, if the things are written differently, you might make a mistake and think the timeline was different. So Rashi says there's no order because the kasha is not such a big kasha lechatchila because it doesn't have to be according to the time. It's not a book that tells you history. Nevertheless, someone who learns it and sees the order differently might make a mistake, and that's not going to be negated to the pshat of the psukim, whichever way it is. The psukim there or some other place, whatever is possible. So Rashi Bavonis tells you this. Al Pizeh is moving, and this explains, by the way, the Rebbe says it's in brackets. Parvos Rashi zok nit frier if impossible back yen kaleis meishel hoken nas amishkon, or the by shalchem and amach nas emuk nechotera. Which, by the way, the Rebbe says the sense is another kasha. We said before that there's two more things that are written later after Pasha Bamidbar and happened before. One we said was, it says the day that Moshe put up the Mishkan, that's when the Nisim had to bring the Karbonis. Another thing it says that Moshe told him, and also the Shchedesh Nisan, concerning sending away the Tomei from the Machne. And that happened before what it says in the beginning of Pasha's Bamidbar, concerning counting Din. And we said before, Rashi doesn't even say that this is a Mugna Muchabateta, there's no order, chronological order. We understand why. But b'moke macher is Rashi mefarish the meat, then the parsha is gezog geworden. Because Rashi already explained when this was said. If the whole reason Rashi writes a mukta bucha b'teira is not because it's you have a problem, how come it doesn't go in the proper order? That's not a problem. The only reason Rashi says it in the other places because you shouldn't make a mistake, thinking that it happened different, and that will be negated to pshat of the posik. Here, no one will make a mistake because in these places Rashi said clearly when that happened. Und dort steht es befeirish, bei Yom Kaleis Moshe. And here it says clearly when it happened. When the Gead in Nisim, it says clearly when did the Eibush say the Nisim should bring the Korban. Rashi says it happened the day the Mishkan was put up. The post in Chumash says when the Mishkan was supposed to Shchedesh Nishan. So we won't make a mistake that this was said different time. The Parsha V'Shacham and Amachne is Rashi mefarish Parsha Zunem Rabbi Yemshuk in the Mishkan. In the Parsha of sending away from the Machne, Rashi says this happened to Shchedesh Nissan, the day the Mishkan was put up. So we won't make a mistake. So there's no reason for Rashi to say there, oh, you see, Ein Mugda Mucha B'Torah. Because Rashi doesn't say it. He only says it for the person not to make a mistake. And when it's clear in the Torah that when this happened, or Rashi makes it clear when this happened, there's no possibility of making a mistake that it happened differently. So there, that's what Rashi says. And Rashi doesn't have to say it. But in our case, Zetman at the Posek und Matthews and them say there is man for the Tzivui Meiroes. Here we see differently. Here the Torah goes out of its way to tell you the time when it happened. Saibe Pasha saying Sayim Pasha Baaloshcho. Like Daber Rabbi al Moshe v'mit Besina Bashona Hashenis l'Tzeis Emer Time Bechidash. That's clearly Hashem spoke to Moshe in the Sinai, and it gives a special time, the second year from going out of Mitzrayim, the first month, saying. And Cyber Reisha Sefer, this is Baaloshcho, sign the beginning of Pasha Bamidbar. It says, like Daber Hashem el Moshe b'midbar Sinai be'el Meid be'echod lachedesh Hasheni b'shona Hashenis l'Tzeis Emer Time limit. Hashem spoke to Moshe in the midbar Sinai be'el Meid, and it says clearly when. Torah goes out of its way to tell you the date. It happened the first day of the second month, which is Iyar, the second year of going out of Mitzrayim. So it says clearly the Torah is trying to tell you exactly when it happened. And nevertheless, when you compare the two parshas, the Torah writes it the opposite of the order. See, when the Torah doesn't stress the date, Elamai, we might come and make a mistake and think that it happened differently. So Rashi tells you, don't worry. But here is a problem. That doesn't answer it. Because here, the Torah is telling you when the date was. The Torah is going out of its way to tell you that in Bamidbar it tells you it happened the Shchedesh Iyar. Here it says it happens Shchedesh Nisan. So why is the Torah right at the opposite? Is Rashi Mafarish, Lamadutos, Rashi comes to tell you, teaches you, do learn from the Rizachidush. Here we see something new. As Ein Seder, there is no order in the chronological order of the Torah, Seder, which means when the Torah is madgish dem zman von the Inyonim mitzvot, even when the Torah stresses the time when these things happened or when these commandments happened, was vezeto is will Torah the midat zelnum Seder von the tzvot mirois. It seems like the Torah is interested in tell you the order of the way things happen. Can dan sein as ein Seder mugdem ruch b'Torah. Then you could also be there is no Seder of mugdem ruch b'Torah. That's a chidush here. You might think when the Torah is not interested in the timeline, so it can mix up the dates, it makes no difference. But when the Torah is trying to tell you the timeline, so here you have a problem. If the timeline isn't important here, so why does it give it a different order? The Rasha says, you know what, even that, no problem. Even when it comes to that, not always does the Torah go in the right line, in the right Seder. Finish. So, but that's a chidush here. The kasha was, why does the Rasha say, well, we know there? No, we don't know it. All we know is that when the time is not important, so mainly you would think, and you might make a mistake, things happen in a different order. So he says, don't worry, it's not ayah. From the fact it's written one after another, there's no ayah, this came first, this came second. But when the Torah is trying to tell you the date, you might think that doesn't apply. So Rasha says, no, it's a chidush, lamadato. Here it's teaching you that even then there is no Seder. That's the first part of Rasha. Weiter is Rasha Mamshel, then Rasha continues. So why didn't the Chumash Bamidbar start with this week's parsha, which is the Chedesh Nisan? Said Bamidbar, beginning of Bamidbar is Chedesh Shir. So why did the Torah Taka not start with this one? And the answer is Mipnei Shegnusan Shel Yisrael, because it brings out an embarrassment for Yidden. That all the 40 years the Yidden were in the desert, they didn't bring only this Korban Pesach. You look in Chumash, what is this week's Pasha saying? Chedesh Nisan, the Eibush told Moshe Rabbeinu, the Yidden should bring the Korban Pesach. And it's the only Korban Pesach they brought all 40 years in the desert. So by bringing this, starting with this, you would be starting with an embarrassment for Yidden. Starting at what happened, the Eibush told them Chedesh Nisan to bring a Korban Pesach, and that's it. Never again did he tell them to bring a Korban Pesach in the 40 years of the Midbar. It's an embarrassment for the Yidden. So the Torah did not want to start with an embarrassing thing. So the Rebbe says, Bashkofa Sheni is Nitumur, first glance, it's not understood. Since Rashi just said that we're learning here that there's no chronological order in the Torah, even in Seder of when the Torah stresses the dates, what's the question? Why didn't it start with it? What kind of question is when you should start with this? The question is, you start with this because this came first. Rashi just said that Torah does not follow the chronological order at all. So what's the kasha? Why this should come first? And we need the Torahs because it's Knusan Shel Yisrael. It's a contradiction basically from what Rashi said before to this. First, Rashi says the order of time doesn't apply, doesn't go according to the order. And then we ask, so why didn't he start with this? Because this came first. But we just said it doesn't matter. And we mizet in the Mokir from Pirish Rashi in Gemara. We see the source of this Rashi, which is in Gemara. So we see there. After the Gemara says that from this order, the way it's written here, that this parsha, the Chedesh Nisan, is written after parsha Bamidbar and Chedesh Ir. We see that there's no order in Torah. Is the Gemara nit mevayir the time for what the Torah hated to their parsha? The Gemara doesn't go on to explain why the Torah doesn't start with this parsha, because it's not self-understood. Seich and Sifri also. Adarab, it's no kasha now. If you say there's no order, chronological order, so it's no kasha why this is not written first. Why should it be written first? There's no order. And then Gemara and the Sifri Taka doesn't ask the question. So why does Rashi, after he says, and he say they're mugna mucha b'Torah, Rashi comes and asks, so why didn't this come first? The Pasha is what we can't answer. Simply, we could have answered. The Rashi is medayik b'l sheni. Rashi is medayik in the exact word it says. Rashi says lomadato nitvi in Sifri l'lamdo. Rashi says lomadato. So now that we see that the Torah is not written in the proper order, we learn from this. We learn that ain't seder mugna mucha b'Torah. There's no seder of time in Torah, even when the Torah stresses a date, it's still not in the proper order. Nitvi in Sifri l'lamdo. In Sifri it says basically the same thing, but it says the Torah did this to teach you. See the difference. Lomadato means you learned, which could mean the Torah wrote it for whatever reason the Torah wanted. In the meantime, we learn from this. But if you say l'lamdo means that the reason the Torah did it is to teach you. Das heißt, als Leugnis für früher der Teire Mishane gewinnen im Seder, Kdei und zu lernen Lamdoch als ein Seder Mugnem Buchem Teire. According to the free, the Teire specifically changed in order to teach you that ein Seder Mugnem Buchem Teire. There's no chronological order. Vashenkel et Rasha, the way he learns, Lomadato, you learn, Meintos nitas solidema the Teire Mishane gewinnen im Seder. That it's not because to teach us this union that there's no chronological order. That's why the Torah changed order. Then we learn out. We see that. The Rashi says, here we see this concept that but that's not the reason the Torah changed it. That's not what Rashi says. And therefore, is the Rebbe the Shaila. So now that Rashi says that that's not the reason why the Torah changed it. But now comes the Shaila. So why didn't they start with this? In other words, there has to be a reason why the Torah changed the order. So according to this, Fritak is no kasha. Changed the order to teach you this idea. But they say the Mugnem Buchem Torah. But Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi says, this is what we learned. Lepel, we learned this out because we see that's what happened. So according to Rashi, Rashi says, so what's the reason? Pavi Bavuz is dort wo mir sagt, ein Mugnem Buchem Torah, hat aber der Torah Kavone was Bore, ich dem Seder von dem Wichen, welche der Pasche sein geschrieben. Because we know that even when we say so it's not like somebody thinks, and this gets pretty stupid to say that, but if someone thinks that there is no reason, the Torah is not written with any order. There's no order. Torah just writes things just like that, without an order. It doesn't make any sense. All it's telling us that the Torah has definitely an order. And the Torah has all kinds of ideas of why the Torah gave it in a certain order. Not the order of time. That's what it means, that the Torah was not written according to the order of the timeline. But there must be an order why the Torah changed. So according to this three here, we have a reason why the Torah changed, to teach you something. But according to Rashi doesn't say Torah changed in order to teach you. The Torah changed must have had a reason why it changed. And in the meantime, we learn now that that's not a chronological order. So after Rashi says this, that it's not a chronological order, so now comes a kash, and the reason the Torah did not write in the order of time is not in order to teach you a Mugnem Buchem Torah. So Rashi says, so what is the order? There must be a special kavanah. There must be, the Torah had a special intention and a special explanation of what came first and what came later. So every time when you have parashas not written in the proper order, so we know it's not a kasha why it's not in the order of time. But the question could be, but what is the reason for the order? In other words, it won't be that the Torah B'dafke writes it against the timeline. That doesn't make any sense. So it's not limited. It doesn't have to go. So it has its own reason how it writes. So what is the reason here? One thing we know from here, we see that it's not according to the timeline. So what is the reason? Why did the Torah not start with this? So the Rebbe says, you can't answer. It's not so simple. If he says the Shaila nit normally posach v'zu, if this is what Rashi is asking, what is the reason why the Torah changed the order? Must be a different reason, not time, but what is the reason? If that's what, so the question should not be in Rashi, why did the Torah not start with this one, with Parsha Baaloshcho, with the Shchetish Nisan? Or was the Torah, no, a different question. Why did Torah, number one, Mishanik Pshat Seder given? You should have asked, why did the Torah change the Seder? Must be a reason why the Torah changed. It's not the question why it should have started with this. If you have a question why it should have started this, why should we ask it should have started with this? Because this came earlier. But that we finished earlier doesn't mean anything. Elamai, there's still a kasha. What's the reason for the Seder? Why did the Taka change? It's not why didn't it start with this. Why did the Torah change the order? But there's no other reason. It should have been the regular time of Zman. Because it makes sense. If there's no special reason to change it, why shouldn't it go according to the timeline? So the question should have been, why did the Torah change the order? Second thing, why the Torah at Magding Venyana Parsha? Why that Parsha came first? That's the question. But Rashi get afragen, nit lama leposa bezu. Rashi should have asked, not why we didn't start with this, nor lomo shina seder. Why did the Torah change the order? Veloma posach the Parsha shebeleif reisha sefer. And why did the Torah start with the Parsha in the way it's over there? In other words, the question is right in the beginning. Question. See, the way Rashi writes it, why didn't Torah start with this? That means the kasha is this should have been before. That's not the real kasha. When we learn by Mibra, the kasha is why do you start with the Shchedish here when there is something that the Shchedish, when something later in the Torah they started with the Shchedish Nisan. So the real question should have been, why did he Lama Pasach Parsha Shabareisha Sefer. Why did he start with the Parsha of Rishchei Shir? Here is mashma that why didn't he start with this Parsha? This Parsha. Why isn't the question worded in such a way? Why didn't he start with this Parsha? Also, we have to understand the Loshen for Rasha's Kashet. Why does Rashi write the Loshen? He should have opened with this Parsha. Should have said that should have come first. In other words, the question is, what's the reason for the order? And the Chanam, it's not verbunden with time. So what is the reason for the order? So he should have said, why didn't the Torah start with what it says in this Parsha, which is Parshas from Rosh Chodesh Nisan? But not Lamalei Posa. I was thinking the beginning. What's the beginning or not the beginning? Even if you have things which are not the beginning, there's something in the middle. You could have asked if it doesn't fit to the order of the time. You ask. So what is the reason for the order? Why is this before this? But not why they started. Rashi is medayek here. Why didn't he start? In other words, he should have started by Midbar with this week's parsha, with the union of the parsha Pesach of Korban Pesach, which happened to Chodesh Nisan. Why does Rashi write Pesach, Lomali Pos, not Lomali? Okay, Yetzbe or something similar. Ich darf verstehen dem Teretz von Rashi. We have to understand the answer. What does Rashi give the answer? Why did the Taka not start with the parsha of Korban Pesach? Because it brings out the gnus, the embarrassment of Yidden. What's the embarrassment? That all the 40 years the Yidden were in the desert, they only brought this one Korban Pesach. Question is, in was besteht the gnus? What's the gnus? What's the embarrassment that they only brought the Korban Pesach once this year and not all the other years in the Midbar? Rashi already explained as Tola Kosa Mitzvah Zu Korban Pesach B'Biyosem Loretz, that the Torah said that the mitzvah of bringing the Korban Pesach is a mitzvah only in Eretz Yisrael. They go into Eretz Yisrael. And they were not obligated in the desert to do a Korban Pesach only once. And that itself was al pi hadibur, because Leib said. In other words, Bemis, they shouldn't even brought one, because the whole mitzvah of Korban Pesach is only in Eretz Yisrael. The Seis is eine befeirish nitztave geworden by Krafos in northern Eretz Yisrael. They were commanded to bring the Korban Pesach only in Eretz Yisrael. So what's the problem? What's embarrassment that they didn't bring the Korban Pesach in the Midbar? Well, they weren't supposed to bring the Korban Pesach in the Midbar. So they weren't commanded. Not only that, since they weren't commanded, b'meila, as akrovas Pesach in Midbar achutz Shmuel is given osir. Not only was it not, they weren't mechuyev. B'meila would have been forbidden. The Torah makros of Mizbeach. If they weren't told to bring the Korban, they were forbidden to bring the Korban Pesach. Something that they were not commanded. So the fact that they didn't bring the Korban because they were not allowed to bring the Korban. This one was an exception. This one came because the Eibush made an exception to the rule. So it's not a question why they didn't bring the other years the Korban Pesach. The question is why did they bring this year? This is not an Eretz Yisrael. It's an exception. So how could you say it's an embarrassment for the Yidden that they didn't bring the Korban Pesach all the years in the Midbar? Teisves and Meforsha Rashi and Masber Teisves and other commentaries of Rashi explain the Hainu Gnuson. What was the embarrassment? The embarrassment is that they didn't go into Eretz Yisrael. And why didn't they go into Eretz Yisrael? Because they sinned with the Meraglim, as we will learn in Parsha Shlach. That's the embarrassment. That's not the embarrassment like about the Korban Pesach. The reason they didn't bring the Korban Pesach because they were in the Midbar. Why were in the Midbar? Because they didn't have Aveira. So the moment you talk about the Korban Pesach, it brings that this year about the Korban Pesach and not years later is an embarrassment for the Eden that they didn't go into that in Eretz Yisrael earlier. So that's what Taisva say. Mefarshim say that. I said, you can't learn Pshuta Shemikra in Rashi that pshat. Warum? Because number one, in unser Parsha from Pesach wird nicht der Montag zu Libov und Amaragma wird man nicht reingehen in Eretz Yisrael. In our Parsha doesn't say that they will not go into Eretz Yisrael. Basically, it's almost like, I'm not saying this exactly, that as far as we're concerned now, this didn't happen yet. The fact that they're going to stay in the Midbar for 40 years is in Parsha Shlach, and our Parsha doesn't say. But Adarabbe, on the contrary, weiter be Parsha Seine, in Parsha Baaloshcho, further on it says, steht, as Moshe had gesagt, Neisim anachnu lamokim. Moshe said to Eden, now we're going to the place. And Peter Rasha says, what does it mean? We're going to Eretz Yisrael. Miyad ad gimel yom nichnosen loris. From now, 3 days it'll take, we'll get to Eretz Yisrael. Because because at this time when he traveled, it was our condition, and they were on the way to Eretz Yisrael. So at this point, we're not talking about Eden not going into Eretz and being 40 years in the desert. It's do bichlal der mon kedusha shel Yisrael. So here, where do we see the embarrassment of Eden? According to the Pshat, that it was because embarrassment was that they didn't go to Eretz Yisrael for 40 years. That's what it means. Who's talking about not going to Eretz Yisrael? The pasuk doesn't mention it. Adarab, it seemed like they thought at this time they're going to Eretz Yisrael. So why is it an embarrassment here? And the second question, the main question is, the fizeh, if you learn the pshat is the embarrassment is that they stayed in the desert. So number one, the gnus in them was nishtao, the chonas loros that mem shown on nida krov from Pesach. According to this, what is the gnus? What is the embarrassment? Not that they didn't bring the korban Pesach. It's not the korban Pesach. It's an embarrassment, clearly general embarrassment that they stayed in the midbar. But we're saying here, why doesn't it start off with the korban Pesach? Why doesn't the korban Pesach? Why is it not written earlier to start with that? Why? Because it's a gnus. What's the gnus? That they didn't go into Eretz Yisrael. But it has nothing to do with the korban Pesach. That they weren't makir of the korban Pesach. That's number one. Number two, if we're going to count this, the fact that they didn't bring the korban Pesach because they didn't go to Eretz Yisrael, that is the gnus. That is the embarrassment. The shaykh need place a korban Pesach. It's not after connected to korban Pesach. All other mitzvahs which are connected to Eretz Yisrael, to going to Eretz Yisrael, many mitzvahs in the Torah did not apply in the midbar. It's only mitzvahs that have to do when they come into Eretz Yisrael. So the 40 years in the midbar, they didn't do any of these mitzvahs. So if it's an embarrassment that they didn't do these mitzvahs because they didn't go to Eretz Yisrael, and that's the embarrassment, so it's nothing to do with Dafke Korban Pesach. Because how could you apply the embarrassment to Korban Pesach? You can't talk about the Korban Pesach because it brings out the fact that they didn't go to the Eretz Yisrael for 40 years, and that's the embarrassment. So it's an embarrassment of everything, all the mitzvahs, trumas, meisers, all the other mitzvahs. Adrab, mehr gnus is the alle andere mitzvahs from them sug. A bigger embarrassment would be the other mitzvahs in this category. The other things they didn't even do once in the midbar. Why Korban Pesach they did once. So if there's any embarrassment, the embarrassment would be more by the others than here. So why would we say that this is called not bringing the Korban Pesach more than once is an embarrassment because they stayed in the midbar? So we're back to the question: if this is not the answer, why it's called an embarrassment? So what does Rashi mean when Rashi says the Torah did not, Bamidbar did not start with the Korban Pesach with our parsha, even though our parsha came earlier, because this parsha represents or shows the gnus of the Eden, the embarrassment of Eden. What embarrassment does this show? Let me verstehen behagnen was Rashi sagt. And understand it by first saying what Rashi says as leposa bezum pnei sheglusin shel Yisrael. Let's look into the words that Rashi says. But why didn't it start with this? Why didn't it start with this? Because it's gnusin shel Yisrael, because it's an embarrassment of the Eden. It's not glatik. Not understood. Ape Torah will not bring a gnusin shel Yisrael. The Torah doesn't want to bring the embarrassment of Eden. That's what Rashi says. But what's that for neighbor to Shel Yisrael? So why? He says the question: why does the Torah tell us b'chlal about it? If learning this part of the Torah brings out an embarrassment of Eden, so the Torah should not say it. We're saying the Torah didn't want to bring the embarrassment, so don't tell us the story. So Rashi says, so the Rebbe says the full movement from that we understand. The main thing is, since we're talking about if they would this would say before, it would be the beginning of a sefer. That's what the Torah does. The Torah doesn't want to write. They start off a chumash with something that brings out the embarrassment of Yidden. When you start a sefer chumash, has to start with something shows the love of the Eibush Yidden. Und wenn wir gefunden Tag in the Psyche für jeden Sefer from the Gimis Svarnische Torah, as we find in the beginning of the 3 Svarim of Chumash, in welches reden sich wegen Eden, which talks about Eden. In other words, Chumash Breish is a different thing. But then Shmeis, Vayikra, and Bamidbar. All of these things is mit Ayin Shel Chiba from Eden. You look, you see that all these beginnings, the Sefer, the Chumash starts with something that represents the life, the love of the Eibush Eden. The Rashi is mafarish and aschol of Yidden Sefer. Rashi explains it in the beginning of every Sefer, every Chumash. Shmeis Rashi says, Ve'ele Shmeis, it starts off with the names of the Yidden. Le'yediyah Chebosan. Rashi says, why does it repeat the names? To show you how much the Eibush loves the Yidden. Vayikra Moshe, Parsha Vayikra is Hashem called Moshe. So Rashi writes, L'kol Dibris, L'chol Amiris, L'chol Tzevuim. Every time it says, Vaydaber Hashem Moshe, Vayemer Hashem Moshe, Vayitzav Whenever it starts of Hashem speaking to Moshe, Kod Mekriya. Before that came Vayikro. Hashem called him. Loshen Chiba. That's love to show you. Call somebody, that's love. And in Bamidbar Rashi says, Vaydaber Bamidbar Sinai. Bamidbar starts over with Eibush speaking Bamidbar Sinai and telling Moshe to count the Eden. Rashi says, Metechi Bosan Lefon the Maiden Misal Kol Shor, because he loves the Eden constantly. So that Shmeis Vayikro Bamidbar. Aldera Zeh B'Sefer Bereishis. Bereishis is a little different because it's before the Eden. But still, the Rebbe wants to show that even the Bereishis we see it. It's talking about the creation of the whole world. So, gleich Rashi. The Rashi says, Ma tam posa beBereishis. Why did they start with Bereishis? Adikavonu derfun shalom psicha. The reason why it starts with this, why it writes this. The question why it writes it, but even beginning with it is keach ma'asav higit lama. David should want to show to his nation, to the Eden, the keach of his actions. Lostis lehem nachlas geim, that he created the world, so he has the right to give the Eden Eretz Yisrael. And as Rashi says, people might find that the Eden stole Eretz Yisrael. So Rashi says that Abish starts with the creation of the world to tell the Eden that you had the right to Eretz Yisrael because I created the world and I could give it to whoever I want. So even Bereishis starts with something has to do with how much Abish loves Eden. And this idea, when you start a Sefer Shabbatera, which means you start a Chumash, we know that already from before, from Shmeis, Vayikra Bamidbar. And even from Bereishis, is, so what really makes us understand that Rasha says, why didn't the Torah start with this parsha of Korban Pesach? What's the question? Is while the parsha zu driktu is the Maidon Chvivas von Eden. This parsha shows the love of Eden. Und der Fahrt wird l'chura given mehr Masim as is sein die Psyche von Sefer Bamidbar. It would fit more that this should be the beginning. Now we said before that the beginning of Bamidbar does show the love of Eden. It says that count the Eden. Rashi says, why did David want to count the Eden? Because he loves the Eden. Nevertheless, Rashi says here that really he should have started with this because this would have been even better to show the love of Eden. The explanation is like this. Chumash Vayikra is Rubik Ekulit Tzivuim from the Meibish from seine Gesog geworden Summation Lachar Kormas HaMishkan. Chumash Vayikra, most of it are commandments that the Eibishter said to Moshe after he put them in the Mishkan. Chumash Vayimidbar et wegen die Tzivuim und dem Seder Amarois and Hagas Bnei Yisrael Vayimidbar. Chumash Vayimidbar talks about how the Eden behaved in the Midbar. But B'meila given Masing, it would have fit. Had the Psyche from Sefer Bamidbar so sein mit der Meile von Eden, weil sie haben kein Gewepeil at Tzivu Hashem. So the love of the Eden that we see in Parsha Midbar should fit to what the whole Chumash talks about. So in Parsha Midbar, talk about the commandments that the behavior of the Vayikra is the commandments. In Chumash Midbar is the commandments and the Seder of how Eden behaved. In that itself, wouldn't it be better if it shows something, start with something that shows how what they actually did, something good they actually did. That Vayasu es HaPesach, Kechol HaShetziv Hashem es Moshe, start off with this parsha, which it says the Eden did the Korban Pesach, and as the Rebbe told Moshe, Kenos Bnei Yisrael, and they did it, B'Shleimusi, B'Milui, they did it completely. Azal Eden Makir again the Korban Hashem B'Meyadei, the Mishkan, all the Eden brought the Korban Pesach in its proper time, and the Mishkan, as supposed to be. Not they had to go so much so that they did what they wanted, that those that couldn't do it came with the complaint, why can't we do it? That shows the love of the Eden. So it should have started with that if we're looking to show the love of the Eden, and the Chumash Bamidbar shows that the Eden actually followed what the Eden did. It should have started with this. Even though that the way it's written now, the beginning of Bamidbar also shows the love of the Eden, that he told Moshe to count them, and the reason why he's counting them because he loves them. So first of all, if you have a choice of two things, and both show the love of Eden, but one also fits to the timeline, that would be a mile. Why start with something that doesn't fit to the timeline? It could have been, even though we don't have to go to the timeline, but there is a timeline that Parshat Korban Pesach was said before the beginning of Bamidbar. So if you have chvives in both, might as well start it with the one that has also fits into the timeline. Why not? There's no reason dafka not to go timeline. So the shaila, the first thing is that Rashi Asad should start with that because the timeline is better, but not because of the timeline, because it also is chavivis. But the Iker is not that. Besides that is the Chiba was Mateicha Basa Meineisam Nitkan Dover Chodesh. This is that the Eibishter loves Yidden. And he shows it by counting them. That's not something new. Es wird schon gebracht durch Sefer Shmeis. The beginning of Shmeis, Rashi says that. Why does Shmeis start with counting the Yidden, or saying the names of the Yidden, counting the Yidden? Because he loves them. So if that we know already, so if that we know, it should have started now with something else to show the love of Yidden, which started with this parsha. Yesh leheisiv, and the Rebbe adds now, if that would have been the beginning of Chumash Bamidbar, the order showing the love of Yidden would go from level to level, from one level to a higher level to a higher level. How? Sefer Shmeis is the chibur from Yidden. It's an atzman. Beginning of Sefer Shmeis shows the Eibishter loves the Yidden itself, just the Be'etzem the Yidden. He loves the Yidden, he counts them. But Drik Zechuis them was monem, which expresses itself in the counting. Sefer Vayikra, the beginning of Vayikra is the chibur from the Eibishter Yidden in Inyan Atzevoyim V'Mitzvahs. That will show the love of the Eibishter to Yidden in the fact that he commanded them to do things. Where do we see that this is an expression of the Eibishter's love? That before he told them the tzivui, the commandment, he called Moshe. That expresses how much he loved to give the Yidden the commandments by calling them first. Like Rashi says, he says that this shows that to any time the Eibishter spoke to him, when he commanded them, so the Eibishter called him first. It doesn't say he called Moshe, but whenever the Eibishter wanted to speak to Moshe, he called him. Shows how much he loves them. Rashi doesn't say that. So Rashi says, not because it's because of Moshe, nor Kasim Loshen Rashi. It's all because of Yidden. Commandment to Yidden. This brings out the commandment to Yidden. How we see it, because at the end of that Rashi says, Aval Nevi'ah but to the Goyish Nevi'im, he revealed to them in the lotion of temporary thing and in the lotion of impurity. So in Chumash Vayikra it starts off showing the love of Yidden. But what love? A love in connection to the commandments. So Chumash Shmei starts with the love of Yidden on its own. Then it goes another step. The Eibishter shows his love when it comes to commandment to the Yidden, not as Moshe himself, but it's because this is by the Goyim is different than by Yidden. Moshe is from the Yidden. The Mele shows the love of the Yidden in connection to the commandments. When the Psicha from the Sefer Shalachas say Sefer Bamidbar, and if the Sefer Bamidbar, which starts with the Parsha of Korban Pesach, would be well, dann give him mit der Meile Chibe von Yidden, and then was the Eibishter hat dann angesagt, that would show another step, another level, that this shows the love of the Eibishter to Yidden with the fact that after the Mishkan was put up, he gave him a special mitzvah. Vayikra shows the love of David Eden with the fact that they gave him mitzvahs. And this would show they gave him a special mitzvah. Was he gave him such a mitzvah that they were not obligated to do it on its own. But this itself shows the praise and the love of Eden. When the Yidden given the mitzvah, they actually kept the mitzvah, Makragan, Korban, the Mishkan, Bishleimus, and they brought the Korban, the Mishkan completely, and they did it all the way they're supposed to, completely, etc., etc. So that's the Shaila that Rashi asked, why didn't he start with this parsha? Start. Since we're saying the starting of a Sefer. But the Kashas was, why does Rashi mention start? Rashi means to ask, why is the order not the Seder of the time the way it is? He should have said, why is the time mixed up? Why is the one before the other? But he said, why didn't he start? This would have been very fit to start Chumash Bamidbar with it. Even more than the fitting of what it started with counting the Eden, because this would have shown the love of the Eibishter to Eden in even a higher level. So it would go with an order, Shmeis, Vayikra, and then Bamidbar. Noch merer, go further. Here, what's written in this parsha of Korban Pesach expresses, number one, the Mail and Shvach von Eden. The Mail, the greatness and the praise of Eden, wie stark sie haben gewollt mit keinem sein Sieg Hashem. Shows, besides, more than what he said before, this shows that Eden actually did the mitzvah, and David gave him a special mitzvah, which really they shouldn't have done, shouldn't have given, but he loved him so much he gave him. It shows even more how much the Eden loved to do the mitzvahs, how much they wanted to do the mitzvahs. We see as Afil Anoshim Ashoit Meila Nefeshod V'Leyochel Asas Pesach, even the people who were Tomei and could not do the Korban Pesach, and they also claimed and Tainet Loman the God built the Akrav as the Korban Hashem. Why are we losing out in not being able to do the Korban Pesach? So it shows even greater love of the Eden, to how much Eden liked to do the mitzvahs. And the second thing, that's how much the Eden shows the greatness of the Eden. And it also shows the chiba from Eden to Eibishter. Not only the how much Eden want to do the mitzvahs, how much Eden are loved by the Eibishter. As hot ongenommen zeer tiny. We see not only what the Eden did, but what the Eibishter loves him. How do we see what the Eibishter loves him? He accepted their tiny, ubakosh, and their request of Lama Nigora. Why we should miss out. And he gave him a chance to fill the chesaron that they were missing and to bring the Korban Pesach Sheni. So this is the Pshat in Rashi. So the Pshat in Rashi is, why did he not start with this? Not because of the Seder of the time. That's maybe a little thing there that's, if anyway, like I said before, if anyway, it could have helped. But that's not the kasha. The kasha is, why didn't he start with this? This would have shown the love of the Eden, which is the beginning of every chumash, more than the others. That's the kasha. And then, man, but the Rashi answered, because this is the embarrassment of the Eden. All 40 years in the Midbar, they only brought this Korban Pesach alone. Which means, as this love that we see in this Parsha, as we just explained, that this would express the love of the Eibush at the Eden, and the Eden, what they did, would explain very much. So this Parsha, which is the Tzivui of Akrovas HaPesach B'Midbar B'Torah Baaloshcho, that the Eibush told him to bring the Korban Pesach was only a Rosh, means a temporary thing, Pesach Sheni, and therefore it comes the mitzvah of Pesach Sheni. This Taka shows the love of the Eden, but bringt mit sich an Shaltus. It comes along with something that's embarrassing. Now, what's the embarrassment? Even though the Torah L'chachila says that this mitzvah is connected to going to Eretz Yisrael, is aber nicht wie andere mitzvahs. So l'chura, what's the embarrassment? They didn't bring the Korban Pesach all the other 40 years, the rest of the 40 years. You just said before, it's not an embarrassment. They weren't supposed to. It's not a mitzvah that has to do with the mitzvah. It's a mitzvah only with Eretz Yisrael. So even though it's a mitzvah in Eretz Yisrael, he's aber nicht wie andere mitzvahs, as eine tolle Bibil Oretz, not like other mitzvahs, which also depend on entering Eretz Yisrael. Was sehr etzem chiyuv v'shayches norma v'kum l'Oretz. Their mitzvah is to begin with only shayich, only possible when you enter Eretz Yisrael. Mitzvah trumas ma'aseres is only when you plant in Eretz Yisrael. And he explains, the Rebbe goes into brackets. Certainly, the mitzvah bikurim, that you have to bring the first fruit to the Beis Hamikdash, or that you have to take off truma ma'aser for everything that's grown, or that afila chala, even you have to take off chala from the dough. The mitzvahs are verbunden mit guf oretz. This mitzvah has to do with the land. The peiros and tvus von Eden Eretz Yisrael. This is a mitzvah that has to do with the fruit that grows in Eretz Yisrael. So this certainly is not even shayach to do in the midbar. Even things which are not connected to the land, like the fact that you have to redeem your firstborn donkey, was nicht shayach to go for it. It's not connected to the land itself. Nevertheless, according to one opinion, you only have to do it in Eretz Yisrael. Is the chiyuv never be awesome loretz, but the chiyuv l'chatchil is on that. So certain things are not even shayach begashmias, because the mitzvah is that you take the fruit from the land. They're not in the land. But even this, also the commandment is a mitzvah in Eretz Yisrael. No problem. It's a mitzvah that's only in Eretz Yisrael. Akrovas HaKorban Pesach is shayach eva midbar. Akrovas HaKorban Pesach is also shayach in the midbar. Zinor was der Eibishter, but you're not mechayev given with negei lepeil b'yosan loretz. The mitzvah of Korban Pesach is a mitzvah in itself, which has nothing to do with the land at all. It's only the Eibishter said for some reason that don't do it. And so it seems like even the Pitin Petach Hamei, which is also not connected to Oretz. So the Rebbe says in the order 49, Rebbe Chal Derech Halach in Kedushin, you look in the Gemara Kedushin, you see how Petach Hamei is not shaychus to Eretz Yisrael, only to Eretz Yisrael, not shaychus anywhere else. But Korban Pesach is a Korban that you bring, and it's connected to Pesach, the Yitzias Mitzrayim. What's the gay if it's Eretz Yisrael or not? Elamai, the Eibishter B'Peil Mamish said, don't do it, you don't have to do it Chutz Lord, in the Midbar. Noch mehr Zeter in the Parsha. We see in this Parsha, Amitzad Bakosha B'Tainda from the Etliche Gzeil to Eden. It's another point he's make which will connect that by the complaint or the request of a few Eden, Loma Nigora, why we should lose out, or the Eibishter gegeben as man from Korban Pesach B'Yudal B'Ir. So the Eibishter gave a new time that you could bring the Korban Pesach a month later, the 14th of year, and he says, "Oh, can a makro Korban Pesach?" they should be able to bring the Korban Pesach. Azach was me gefindt nicht bei kein andere Mitzvah the Korban. By other Mitzvah Korban, we don't find it. Was me sagt as Bechlal, over yom mit bottle Korban Bechlal. By every Korban, there's a time you bring the Korban, there's a time passed, that's it. You can't bring the Korban. So this is the Shaila. So we see here like this. 2 points, which is Negaya. Number one, there's no logical reason why the Korban Pesach should not be in the Midbar. It's not like Be'etzem, it's not Shaykhis to the Midbar, only Teretz Yisrael. It's Shaykhis to be in the Midbar. But the Eibush Lapel didn't. And not only that, you see that a strong connection to being able to be done, even when you don't have to, we see from the fact that the Eibush gave Pesach Sheni. If you Yidden complained, and if it's not Shaykhis, in this time, the Eibush would not listen to them. The Eibush listened. That all shows that Be'etzem, the Korban Pesach is Shaykhis in the Midbar also. So bad the Shaila. So the question is, I feel by Ben Chumash and even by a child that just started learning Chumash. Wie kommt es, as the Allah Lamet schon the Eden seine when in Midbar? How is it that all the 39 years that the Eden were in the desert, they didn't complain and they didn't request from the Eibush. Why should we miss out? As they will, they want to bring the Korban Pesach. So if it would be a mitzvah that's not shaykh, you can't complain of why, like any mitzvah. Sunday, why don't I keep Shabbos today? You can't complain, the mitzvah is not there. But if it's a mitzvah that the etzem has a shaykhs, elamai, they said don't, so they should have asked. If it's shaykh and they're able to do it, they should have asked. Just like here, people who were Tomei. A Tomei person can bring a korban. What did they complain? We want a korban. Like, what do you mean they complained? We want also to bring a korban. There are halachas in the korban. You can't be a Tomei. Shows that Korban Pesach could be something different because be'etzem et shaykhis, even if it's not the right time. So Korban Pesach be'etzem shaykhis in the midbar. So the Yidden should have complained. The Vater das is given der Korban was sie geratet in Mitzrayim. Especially this Korban that saved the Yidden in Mitzrayim and gebracht to the Gula from Mitzrayim, brought them to the redemption of Mitzrayim. The Rebbe said to Kal V'chemer. Mal doch b'shas einzig Yidden am geteinet Laman de Gora. Mal doch when a few Yidden Taine complained and said, Laman de Gora, why we should miss out. But the Rebbe says he gave him a gelegenheit to makar seinem Korban. The Rebbe gave him an opportunity to bring the Korban. Allah has come and become a certain when alle Yidden, this is a few Yidden. If alle Yidden, all the Yidden wissen that their Korban is not like the Shai Mitzvah now knowing that this is not like other mitzvahs that have no connection to the Midbar. It's only Eretz Yisrael. Then they can complain. Knowing that Be'emes, the Korban is Shaykhis to be in the Midbar. So if all of them wollten gebeten und gemont beim Eibishten, and they would have requested and as the Eibishter, as they will makar seine Korban Pesach, that they want to bring the Korban Pesach. But Dugma bis Yom das getan bei Midbar Shon Hashem is like they did it in the Midbar the second year of going out to Mitzrayim. They would have, the Eibishter would have listened to them because this is a Korban Pesach with Shaykhis, and you see. At one time, the Eibishter told him, even if it's not really in the Midbar, it's not the Korban doesn't belong in that time. The Eibishter gave him. Shows that all you needed is a little bit of request. They would have gotten this mitzvah. Just like we see here that a few Yidden did it. So if all the Yidden would ask for it, they would have gotten it. And das is Gnusan Shal Yisrael. That's the embarrassment of a Yidden. Shekol Arboim Shona Shal Yisrael b'Midbar leYekriva lePesach Zeh B'Levad. The embarrassment is, as Rashi says, that all the 40 years they were in the Midbar, they only brought this Korban Pesach. But Eden betten by Eibush and Lama Nigora, the Eden would ask by the Eibishter the other years. Why should we lose the mitzvah Korban Pesach? Wollten sie gepeilt, they would have accomplished. And Makirei and the Korban Kol Arboim Shon, they would have brought the Korban all 40 years. So now we know a Nupshat, what is the embarrassment? So the Kasha was, this shows the love of the Eden. So this should be the beginning of Chumash Bamidbar. And the answer is, in the Chanam, it shows the Chvivas of Eden very much in all the milas it has, but because it also brings out a certain chasson in the Eden. Certain embarrassment that the Yidden did not request from the Eibishter. Why didn't they? Seeing what happened here, that this is a korban that, even though it's only supposed to be in Eretz Yisrael, but here it wasn't Eretz Yisrael, the Eibishter told him to bring the korban. Plus, there were some people who asked for an extension that the Eibishter gave him. So they should have asked for all the years. And that they didn't ask shows an embarrassment. It's as if showing they didn't care. And that's why the Torah did not want to start with this, a Chumash Bamidbar, and it started with the other thing which shows the love of the Eden, which is counting of the Eden. But now we have a question. How is it shaykh? Is that Moshe not made the Eden tak it's a chasson? They missed also. They didn't realize they could have done it. But Moshe not and all those similar Why did they not ask? Why didn't they ask? Why didn't Moshe not ask? And the other tzaddikim there, great people there, they knew the truth, but they should have asked. Why didn't they ask? By the you can say it's an embarrassment. It shows a lack. But by Moshe Naden, you can't say a lack. So why Taka didn't they ask? The answer is not al pshat. I don't know if a pshat it's a kasha, but in Chassidus, the answer is like this: the leaders of the Eden, the first thing that they worry about and think about and care about is what concerning the Eden. We find a Moshe gave up his life for Eden. Not only his body gave up, his spiritual part, his nefesh, and the Shoma. If you don't forgive the Eden for the Egel, erase me from the Torah. You can imagine what that meant. Moshe's in the Torah, his whole ruchnis is Torah. He was ready to give that up. Why? Because first and foremost, before he cared for himself or anything, cared about Eden. Now we'll understand concerning Arinya why Moshe Naden did not ask the Eibishter to bring the Korban Pesach all the years in the Midbar. But with the Skum Taruz Pasha, the embarrassment of the Eden, the way it's expressed in this Pasha, as we said before, is nit azayfel be'at gosher. Is not so clear, not so stressed that this shows the embarrassing. Because after all, we do not find that it's possible through requesting that David should give in to make. Nor, what we do find, Hashlome to the Rakrove was Ali Yidin Hom Zayin Mischayv Yoni anymore. Only everyone was obligated to bring. There were a few people who didn't. So you could be mashlim, you could fix that. That David gave in. So good. So we said that the gnus is, the embarrassment is you see that these people asked the guy that you should have asked. Not so clear about it. The truth is they would have gotten it. But it doesn't stress so much the embarrassment, the lack of caring by the Eden that they didn't ask for it. On the other hand, the Moshe Aden wollten gebeten beim Moshe, als sie so machen in Korban Pesach. The Moshe Aden would have asked David to do in Korban Pesach. Und wollten das gepeilt. And they would have accomplished that. But feel for Ali, not only that they would be able to bring Korban Pesach, they would have accomplished it, all the Eden could bring. Well, those Gufa Ruz gebracht, dus shel Yisrael noch an aggressor in Neven. Then the embarrassment of the fact that the Eden didn't ask for it would have been brought out in a bigger way. Because that would have shown that this is a korban that you could accomplish. The David should give you the opportunity to bring a korban by asking. So if Moshe Aaron would have asked and would have accomplished, then you would see the contrast. You see, this shows clearly that this is a korban that you could accomplish to get it by asking. And the Eden didn't ask. The Riber of Moshe Aaron, therefore Moshe and Aaron, they were the real shepherds, the real leaders of the Eden. Not to emphasize and bring out in a more revealed way the embarrassment of the Eden, the chesron of the Eden that they didn't ask for it. So they gave over, they didn't care about their reaching a higher level. Something they weren't commanded. If they were commanded, they have to do it. So we're saying they could have asked for the korban, they would have got it, but they were not commanded. So they're ready to forego the milah that they could have gotten by asking. So to get the milah, bringing a korban pesach, by asking, a beat to up in order to be careful with the covet of Eden, because this would have been a blemish on the honor of the Eden. Because if they would have asked and gotten for it, then it would be very clear and very obvious the chesron that the Eden had by not asking. So he'd rather not ask and not get the Korban Pesach, which is a great madrege, because they cared more about the Korban Pesach, more than what they cared about what they would gain, the ruchnis, by bringing the Korban Pesach. Based on this, we could explain, according to Yena Shel Teira, which is the Chassidus of Rashi, this was the minyan as ein seder mugde muchel Teira, learned from their parsha. We go back to the beginning of the Sikha. The Rebbe said, the Chiddush here is, Ein seder mugde muchel Teira. There's no seder. Like the seder of Chlal, the Teira is not written in chronological order that we know. Here the Chiddush is that even when the Teira stresses the dates, the seder is still not going according to the timeline. So the Lashon is Seder, which means the way it's written here, it's not in the Seder, not in the simple Seder that we would think. Even when it says the dates, it's not in the proper Seder. So the Rebbe says this is what we said before. So now we understand Al Pichsid the connection to what we just said. The Chiyuv from Pesach Sheni, but that's the Chiddush from the Parsha. The obligation to bring Pesach Sheni, that's the Chiddush of this Parsha. In other words, Korban Pesach itself is not the real Chiddush, even though it's a Chiddush that they have to bring it this year. But the Etzem Korban Pesach we know from before. The Chiddush of this Parsha is that there's a new din that you could bring Pesach Sheni if you didn't get to bring Pesach Rishon. It's in Yonah Nit with the Reif Nachiv and Pesach Rishon. It's not like when the obligation of the regular Pesach, Korban Pesach, or Bechal andere Mitzvahs, or even Bechal generally andere Mitzvahs, when the Chatchilu ausgestellt geworden und darf sein ab Pesach from Torah. Bismane. Everything, the Korban Pesach has its time, has its Seder. That's a Seder. Ganz Seder. Every mitzvah has a Seder. Part of the Seder that has its time. Pesach Sheni is different than that. The dos is an Eifem for Shlei al Seder. Pesach Sheni is not in a Seder. That means, but divos ham nit maken again the Pesach is money. People who did not follow the proper order, not being their fault, but it was not the proper order. So Pesach Sheni, which is the Chiddush of this Parsha, brings out the concept of going not according to the normal Seder if things are done. Und neich der Eifem mit the mitzvah is nicht gesagt geworden zu Eden. And also the way the mitzvah was to the Eden in the midbar to bring the Korban Pesach is given Shalei al Pi Seder. Also wasn't really the proper order of things. Von andere mitzvahs, like other mitzvahs and other commandments. But the Rebbe hat mitzvah gemeint, all other mitzvahs, that's the mitzvah the Rebbe gave. But here, the way it was done, so not only, not the general Korban Pesach is not that. The Rebbe is saying the fact that we got Pesach Sheni is not al Pi Seder because it's not in the proper time. So it's not al Pi Seder. Not only that, how did we get to Pesach Sheni is also not in the normal way. That's the Rebbe would have said Pesach Rishon. And then David decided, and he said, you know what? Those that didn't do it. So that's a Seder. It's also not a Seder because it's telling him to do something that's not regular. But at least it came from David. This didn't come like that. This came as an answer to the Taine, Ubakoshe for need not Meimel Nefesh, Nefesh Odom Nigor. It came as an answer to those who requested, saying we're Tomei and why should we lose? So that's also not a Seder. It didn't come in a regular, David told him to do it. So it's two things in Pesach Sheni, which is not in the regular order. Number one, it's not in the normal time. Number one, the way it was given was not in the normal way. Normally, it's given because the Eibusher told you to do a certain mitzvah. Moshe Afilu, the Pesach, the first Pesach that they brought in the Midbar, was given by the Eibusher. The Eibusher told him to do it, even though it's not really according to normal order, because really the din is that in the Midbar there's no Korban Pesach. But still, the Eibusher gave. But this the Eibusher didn't give. When they asked for it, the Eibusher gave. That's not the normal way. In Avedas Hashem, he does the ring of Avedas Tshuva. When you say doing something not in the regular order, that represents Tshuva. It's not like somebody who serves the Eibusher straight, in a proper order. Asher also lekimas Adam Yosher. It says a posik in Kehelis. The Eibusher made a person straight. So if you do everything straight, that's the normal seder. So, but Tshuva is not that. Nor ein was is durchgefallen, he stumbled, he sinned, he made a blemish, he went off the derech. And that's what Tshuva is. Tshuva is to somebody who is not doing things al pi seder. Which is connected to the fact that which people bring the Korban Pesach Sheni is the people who are Tomei. The union of Tumeh is connected to doing Averis, as the Rebbe explained in other places. The Mele, the union of Pesach Sheni is connected to Tshuva. So it's connected to Tshuva, fits to the idea that there's no Seder here. And das is the Remes in Rasha, in them, this is the Remes, the hint in Rasha, when he says, Mipnei she'gnusen shel Yisrael, it's the embarrassment of Yidden shekol mem shona shel Yisrael b'midbar le'ikriva le'pesach zeh b'levad, all 40 years they only brought this Korban Pesach. That means, as eich di akrove b'meshach the ganze arboim shona, but gedarf kumen an eich m'shlei al pi Seder. As we said before, that the time that the embarrassment is, why didn't they ask for it? That means that they could have brought the Korban Pesach all 40 years, and that also would have been not in the proper order. It would have come through asking, just like these people asked, which is not the Seder of the way David did everything. And that's how they got the mitzvah. This could have been all 40 years. Just like when he told them to bring this Korban Pesach, is also not in the proper order, because really it shouldn't be. Die bald beim Midbar sein, sind in Israel geworden. And the Midbar are not obligated. Und bei Ikera, sie haben gedarft, Monen und Betten beim Eibischen. And especially they had to ask for it. So we see that the Korban Pesach here was given Shlei Al Peseder. So a little bit Shlei Al Peseder that he told them to do the mitzvah. But really it's not the proper time to do the mitzvah because in the Midbar really they're not obligated. Shlei Al Peseder. Certainly the Pesach Sheni, Shlei Al Peseder, not Al Peseder, because that Pesach Sheni, which came because of a request. So all the years in the Midbar could have been the same way. Could have been Shlei Al Peseder. And that's what Rashi means when Rashi says, Ein Seder. On this scene, he says there is no Seder. And then Rashi continues and he says that this brings out the gnus, the embarrassment of the Eden, goes together. The embarrassment of the Eden, why they didn't go up Shlei Seder. They could have done something which is not up Seder, and they would have gotten it. And that's why here it says, Ein Seder Mugdam Muhammad. There is no Seder. And then Rashi continues the gnus of the Eden. The time of them is, what's the reason? Why Taka could have been that in the Midbar all the 40 years, they could have asked for the Korban Pesach and got something which is Shalei Al Peseder, which is similar to the union of Tshuva. But the reason is, because the Mesh of the Aliyah and Shal Yisrael the Midbar, all the years that Eden were in the Midbar is given a matzah from Lachar Achet. Why were they 40 years in the Midbar? Because they were constantly after the Aveira. But the Pharisee not given a Midbar canal. They were in the Midbar because they did the Aveira. Not for the matzah for Eden by the Akrova from Korban Pesach from Mitzrayim. Not like when the Eibishter told them in Mitzrayim to bring the Korban Pesach. What was their situation? It wasn't because of Aveiras. It was eine Dämmel gestanden in der Matzah von erst geboren werden. They were just born then as a nation. But in the Midbar it came because they were after the Aveira. So the Aveira was still there. So if you do an Aveira, you have to do Tshuva. The Melech sich Dämmel wieder gefordert bei Eden an Aveira von Ein Seder. So in the Midbar, all the 40 years, which was the Aveda was still lingering over them. So what was needed from them? Tshuva, which is the Ein Seder, no Seder, L'maylam is Seder, beyond Seder. Because by Tshuva, we know it says you could do Tshuva without an order, not normal. In one moment, you could change. Obviously, it doesn't go in the order of time. It doesn't go, which is Aveda, this Aveda is the Tshuva. And this is the Ruchnis, the Chassidische Pshat in Rashi, Ein Seder Mugdem Muchtere. And then he says there was a gnus of the Eden didn't bring the korban. And the Rebbe says, what was the gnus? What was the embarrassment? That they didn't ask for it, which would have been not a normal Seder. The Rashi, the Ein Seder, and that's the gnus of the Eden, that they didn't follow up in the Ein Seder, in the scene of doing something beyond Seder, which is asking for the Korban Pesach and would have expressed Shuvah. Apile kola now come to is as a Pasha saying, land with them Gedlo Inyan from the Bakosha Lamanigora. That all this we see in our Parsha, the great concept of requesting from the Eibishter why we should be missing out. Why should we lose out? Since Torah is eternal, Ayro and it's a lesson forever. Is moving. We understand that dos is negeya, that is important in all times, in all places. Especially now. And what the Rebbe is trying to say that this text tells us that we have to ask. There's an obligation to ask Lama Nigora. There is a movement in the Bakoshes that feels in Israel Bechal. This tells us what is the meaning of Yidden davening, questioning from the Eibishter how important it is. We see that in our parsha, how important it is, how they accomplish by asking, and the problem, the chesodin that was there that they didn't ask for the korban all 40 years. Lachas kama v'kama. So first, it's important to teach us the importance of asking from Hashem. Certainly, the bakosha nafsh is the bakosha that comes from deep of the person, from kol echad v'echad b'nei Yisrael, from every yid, as well zayin. Let's skip the parenthesis for a second, that it should be the gula amitis v'ashleima. That the gula should come a from the miyat and the golem should do it right away. And the parenthesis, the Rebbe says, why is it now even more important? Vorem says, doch kol kitzim. The Gemara says, all the kitzim, all the time set for Mashiach to come is over already. So now for sure it's time for him to come. So now for sure, it's very important to ask for the coming of Mashiach. Baaloshcho tefillah samida, like the Baaloshcho from Shmonesre, Vasiden seine mispalel 3 Mal jeden Tag. We daven 3 times Shmonesre, and we say this thing 3 times in the weekdays. Shabbos is different Shmonesre, but in the weekdays, what do we say? We ask the Eibishter, Semach David Avdecha Meheres Atzmiach. The growth of David, your servant, in fast you should make grow. That means bring Mashiach right away. When you're the from Nalut Filis, Shabbos Yonte, when we finish off Shmonesre, and even Shabbos Yonte, what do we say? Yirotzein, Sheibona Beis Hamikdash Meir Remeina. We're asking David, let it be your will to build the Beis Hamikdash very soon. And this means kipshute. It means posha kipshute. We're asking for it. But we see the importance of asking for it from this week's Pasha, where we see the importance of asking for the Korban Pesach, and they got Pesach Sheni, and the point that the Chesoron, that the Gnus, and that's what the Chumash did not start with this, it brings out that they didn't ask. So it shows how important it is to ask for what you need, especially for the most important thing, coming of Mashiach.